The New World Order by H.G. Wells. In this small book, I want to set down as compactly, clearly, and usefully as possible the gist of what I have learned about war and peace in the course of my life. I am not going to write peace propaganda here. I'm going to strip down certain general ideas and realities of primary importance to their framework, and so prepare a nucleus of useful knowledge for those who have to go on with this business of making a world peace. I am not going to persuade people to say yes, yes, for a world peace. Already we have had far too much abolition of war by making declarations and signing resolutions. Everybody wants peace or pretends to want peace, and there is no need to add even a sentence more to the vast volume of such ineffective stuff. I am simply attempting to state the things we must do and the price we must pay for world peace if we really intend to achieve it. Until the Great War, the First World War, I did not bother very much about war and peace. Since then, I have almost specialized upon this problem. It is not very easy to recall former states of mind out of which, day by day and year by year, one has grown. But I think that in decades before 1914, not only I, but most of my generation in the British Empire, America, France, and indeed throughout most of the civilized world, thought that war was dying out. So it seemed to us it was an agreeable and therefore a readily acceptable idea. We imagined the Franco-German War of 1870-71 and the Russo-Turkish War of 1877 to 78 were the final conflicts between the great powers, that now there was a balance of power sufficiently stable to make further major warfare impracticable. A triple alliance faced a dual alliance, and neither had much reason for attacking the other. We believed war was shrinking to mere expeditionary affairs on the outskirts of our civilization, a sort of frontier police business. Habits of tolerant intercourse, it seemed, were being strengthened every year, that the peace of the powers remained unbroken. There was indeed a mild armament race going on, mild by our present standards of equipment. The armament industry was a growing and enterprising one, but we did not see the full implication of that. We preferred to believe that the increasing general good sense would be strong enough to prevent these multiplying guns from actually going off and hitting anything. And we smiled indulgently at uniforms and parades and army maneuvers. They were the time-honored toys and regalia of kings and emperors. They were part of the display side of life and would never get to actual destruction and killing. I do not think that exaggerates the easy complacency of, let us say, 1895, 45 years ago. It was a complacency that lasted with most of us up to 1914. In 1914, hardly anyone in Europe or America below the age of 15 had seen anything of war in his own country. The world before 1900 seemed to be drifting steadily toward a tactic but practical unification. One could travel without a passport over the larger part of Europe. The postal union delivered one's letters uncensored and safely from Chile to China. Money, based essentially on gold, fluctuated only very slightly, and the sprawling British Empire still maintained a tradition of free trade, equal treatment, and open-handedness to all corners round and about the planet. In the United States, you could go for days and never see a military uniform. Compared to today, that was, upon the surface at any rate, an age of easygoing safety and good humor, particularly for North Americans and the Europeans. But apart from that steady, ominous growth of the armament industry, there were other and deeper forces at work that were preparing trouble. The foreign offices of the various sovereign states had not forgotten the competitive traditions of the 18th century. The admirals and generals were contemplating with something between hostility and fascination. The huger weapons, the steel industry, was gently pressing into their hands. Germany did not share the self complacency of the English speaking world. She wanted a place in the sun. There was increasing friction about the partition of the raw material regions of Africa. The British suffered from chronic Russophobia with regard to their vast appropriations in the East, and set themselves to nurse Japan into a modernized imperialist power. And also, they remembered Majuba. The United States were irritated by the disorder of Cuba and felt that the weak, extended Spanish possessions would be all the better for a change of management. So the game of power politics went on, but it went on upon the margins of the prevailing peace. There were several wars and changes of boundaries, but they involved no fundamental disturbance of the general civilized life. They did not seem to threaten its broadening tolerations and understandings in any fundamental fashion. Economic stresses and social trouble stirred and muttered beneath the orderly surfaces of political life, but threatened no convulsion. The idea of altogether eliminating war, of clearing what was left of its away, was in the air, but it was free from any steady dissemination of the conceptions of arbitration and international law. It really seemed to many that the peoples of the earth were settling down in their various territories to a litigious rather than a belligerent order. If there was much social injustice, it was being mitigated more and more by a quickening sense of social decency. Acquisitiveness conducted itself with decorum, and public spiritedness was in the fashion. Some of it was quite honest public spiritedness. In those days, and they are hardly more than half a lifetime behind us, no one thought of any sort of world administration. That patchwork of great powers and small powers seemed the most reasonable and practicable method of running the business of mankind. Communications were far too difficult for any sort of centralized world controls. Around the World in 80 Days, when it was published 70 years ago, seemed an extravagant fantasy. It was a world without telephone or radio, with nothing swifter than a railway train or more destructive than the earlier types of AT shell. They were marvels. It was far more convenient to administer that world of the balance of power in separate national areas, and since there were such limited facilities for peoples to get at one another and do each other mischiefs, there seemed no harm in ardent patriotism and the complete independence of separate sovereign states. Economic life was largely directed by irresponsible private businesses and private finance, which, because of their private ownership, were able to spread out their unifying transactions in a network that paid little attention to frontiers and national, racial, or religious sentimentality. Business was much more of a world commonwealth than the political organizations. There were many people, especially in America, who imagined that business might ultimately unify the world and governments sink into subordination to its network.